Cadillac lost $10,000 on every single car they built, and they knew it before the first one left the factory. The 1957 Eldorado Brougham cost $13,700, more than the average American house. It shipped with memory seats, automatic air suspension, and transistor electronics that no other production car would carry for 40 years. The problem wasn't ambition. The materials science didn't exist yet to keep it running. Cars were breaking down before owners reached the driveway, because the industry had built the future before the future was ready. In the next 8 minutes, you'll see exactly 3 engineering decisions that made this car impossible to own, and one that changed the entire industry anyway. To understand why the Brougham existed at all, you have to understand what Cadillac was, and what, for the first time in a generation, was beginning to threaten it. By the middle of the 1950s, Cadillac had spent years operating under a title they had effectively appointed to themselves, Standard of the World. They used it without apparent irony, and the market largely validated the claim. Heads of state rode in Cadillacs. The Hollywood studio system ran on them. Aristotle Onassis owned one. The brand carried a weight of cultural prestige that no American competitor had come close to seriously challenging. If you had made it in America, you demonstrated that fact from the driveway of your home in a Cadillac. There was no viable alternative. Then, Ford made their move. The Lincoln Continental Mark II arrived for the 1956 model year at $10,000, an extraordinary figure for the era, and it represented something Cadillac had not faced before. A credible American challenger positioned not through excess, but through restraint. The Continental was understated, almost European in its composure. Clean lines, a kind of quiet authority, and a deliberate avoidance of the chrome-laden extravagance that Cadillac had built its identity around. It was beginning to attract precisely the buyers Cadillac had always considered theirs by default. Buyers who wanted to be understood as people of taste, not merely wealth. The threat was real, and Cadillac's leadership recognized it as such, which is why their response was not a subtle refinement of what they already offered. It was something altogether more aggressive in its ambition. Rather than match the Continental's quieter register, Cadillac's decision was to overwhelm it. The objective, stated plainly in the engineering briefs that shaped the project, was to build something so densely loaded with technology, so deliberately advanced in every dimension, that the Continental would be made to look modest by comparison. Not just the most luxurious American car, the most technologically sophisticated automobile being produced anywhere on Earth in 1957. Domestic competitors, European manufacturers, everyone, that was the target. And the statement required a price that made the ambition unambiguous, which is why Cadillac engineers studied the new Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud's price of approximately $13,000, then set the Brougham's price above it, not to compete with Rolls-Royce, to exceed it. Because that is what the statement being made required. Whether 1957 technology was fully equal to the demands placed on it turned out to be a considerably more complicated question than the brief anticipated. And that gap between ambition and execution is where the most instructive and genuinely fascinating parts of the story live. The Brougham did not materialize fully formed in the 1957 model year. Its origins trace back to 1954. When Cadillac's legendary design chief Harley Earl began developing a concept that was first shown to the public at GM's celebrated Motorama shows in 1954 and 1955. These were the traveling exhibitions that General Motors used to measure public appetite for experimental designs before committing the engineering investment required to bring them to production. The response to what would become the Brougham was not simply positive. It was enthusiastic enough that the internal conversation at GM shifted from whether to produce the car to how quickly it could be made road-ready without compromising what had made it so compelling on the show floor. The answer was a 3-year development program, culminating in the 1957 release, with Harley Earl's team working to translate a show car designed to generate admiration on a rotating platform into a vehicle that could be delivered to private buyers and live in the real world without embarrassing the brand that had staked so much of its reputation on it. What they produced after those 3 years of concentrated engineering and design work was one of the most technically dense production automobiles ever assembled on American soil. A car that serves in retrospect as an almost complete index of where automotive technology stood in 1957, in terms of both what was genuinely possible and what was not yet quite ready for the demands of daily use. Every Eldorado Brougham received Cadillac's 365 cubic inch V8. but not the version finding its way under the hoods of the rest of the Cadillac lineup that year. The Brougham's engine was a specially prepared unit, fitted with dual 4-barrel carburetors on a unique intake manifold engineered for freer induction airflow, producing 325 horsepower against the 300 horsepower the standard Cadillac V8 was generating. A meaningful difference that reflected the car's position as the range's absolute pinnacle. But the horsepower figure is not the most significant thing about the Brougham's engine. What distinguished it from every other production? V8 being assembled in America in 1957 was what happened before it was installed in a car. Each engine was removed from the production sequence and individually bench-tested in a dedicated sound booth, where engineers listened for anything that deviated from the standard the car required. Any knock, any vibration, any irregularity. If an engine failed to meet that standard, it was pulled from the Brougham program and reworked or rejected. It did not go into the car. This level of individual quality verification for a production engine was essentially without parallel in the American automotive industry of the era, where manufacturers built to tolerances and trusted those tolerances to produce acceptable consistency across a production run. Cadillac was doing something qualitatively different, treating each engine as an individual object to be evaluated against a specific standard, rather than as one instance of a repeating manufacturing process. The Brougham also featured one of the first full-flow oil filtration systems in production automotive use, meaning all engine oil passed through the filter before reaching the engine's moving components. And it carried one of the earliest applications of an in-tank electric fuel pump, which pushed fuel toward the engine rather than relying on suction to pull it forward, specifically addressing the vapor lock problems that had plagued fuel systems in hot weather conditions for years. The car weighed over 5,300 pounds and moved all of that mass through Cadillac's 4-speed hydromatic automatic transmission with what contemporary road testers consistently described as effortless, composed authority. Here is the part of the Brougham story that most people never hear about, because what actually made it into the 1957 car is only half the engineering story. The other half is what was considered and ultimately set aside, and what that tells us about how far ahead Cadillac's engineers were actually thinking. Early engineering proposals for the Brougham had included fuel injection and a front-wheel drive transaxle layout. Both were eventually removed from the program when the development costs associated with them spiraled beyond what even GM was willing to absorb on a halo car that was already projected to lose money on every unit produced. Let that register for a moment. Fuel injection and front-wheel drive were under serious engineering consideration at Cadillac in 1954 and 1955. Not as theoretical ideas, not as concept studies, as production proposals that had already moved into active development before the cost reality of the program forced them out. These were not ideas waiting to be conceived. They were ideas that had already been conceived, were being actively developed at the highest level of American automotive engineering, and were constrained only by budget rather than imagination. The era is typically understood as one of straightforward excess. Big fins, big chrome, big engines. The Brougham engineering brief tells a considerably more complicated story than that. If the fuel injection and front-wheel drive proposals represent the ambition that never made it to production, the air suspension system represents the ambition that did make it, and then ran directly into the limits of what 1957 materials science could reliably support. The 1957 Eldorado Brougham was the first production automobile in the world to use a fully automatic air suspension system, not air-assisted. Not manually adjustable. Fully automatic across all 4 corners, with no driver input required under any circumstances. Rather than conventional coil or leaf springs, each corner of the Brougham used a rubber air dome, a pressurized chamber that replaced the traditional spring entirely, fed by an electric compressor that maintained pressure through an accumulator tank connected to leveling valves at each wheel. Those valves monitored ride height continuously and made constant micro-adjustments, adding or releasing air pressure to maintain a level, consistent platform regardless of passenger load, luggage weight, or road surface conditions. Load 3 passengers into the rear seat. The suspension compensated automatically. Take a hard corner. The body stayed level. In theory, this was not merely a new feature. It was a complete reconception of what a car's relationship with the road could feel like. And when the system functioned as designed, contemporary road testers described the Brougham as the smoothest riding American automobile they had ever experienced, a characterization that appeared independently across multiple publications and was not simply a repetition of manufacturer claims. The problem emerged when the system didn't function as designed, and it emerged with sufficient frequency to become a documented pattern rather than an isolated series of unfortunate events. The air suspension of this era depended on rubber components and pneumatic circuits that proved sensitive to temperature extremes, sustained vibration, and the simple passage of time in ways that the engineers had not fully anticipated and been unable to design around given the material science available to them in 1957. When a failure occurred, the consequences were not gradual. The car didn't ride a little rougher. It didn't sit slightly lower. When the air suspension failed on an Eldorado Brougham, the car settled immediately and completely onto its frame. Undrivable. Instantly. One documented case involves the very first Brougham delivery. The new owner accepted the car at the Detroit factory, and the air suspension failed before the journey home was complete. The situation became widespread enough that Cadillac eventually released an official conversion kit, allowing owners to replace the air suspension with conventional coil springs. A quiet, practical acknowledgement from Cadillac's own engineering department that the technology, however correct in concept, had not been ready for the real-world demands of production vehicle use in 1957. What makes this failure genuinely interesting rather than simply embarrassing is the specific nature of what was wrong. The concept of air suspension was not flawed. Every serious luxury vehicle produced in the world today, every modern Rolls-Royce, every Mercedes S-Class, every Range Rover, every Bentley Continental, uses a sophisticated air suspension system descended directly from the principle that Cadillac deployed on the Brougham. The engineers were not wrong about what air suspension could achieve. They were working 60 years before the rubber compounds, seal tolerances, and pneumatic fitting technologies required to make the system reliably durable in daily use had been developed. That is a very specific kind of failure, the kind that the subsequent history of the technology vindicates completely, even as the immediate execution falls short of what the car promised. While the air suspension represents the outer edge of what 1957 could reliably support, the rest of the Brougham's technology list demonstrates how much of what the car offered was not only ready, but decades ahead of where the broader industry would eventually follow. Memory power seats were standard equipment on the Eldorado Brougham. The driver's seat moved back automatically when the door was opened, providing clearance for entry into a car sitting as low to the ground as the Brougham did, then repositioned to the driver's previously saved preference when they sat down and the door closed. This is a feature that modern drivers encounter across a wide range of vehicles and consider entirely unremarkable. In 1957, no other production automobile anywhere in the world offered it. The electronic eye, Cadillac's version of GM's automatic headlamp dimming system, used a photoelectric sensor mounted atop the dashboard to detect the headlights of oncoming vehicles and automatically switch from high beams to low without any driver input. When the oncoming vehicle passed, the system reactivated the high beams automatically. The sensor had documented tendencies to misread certain streetlights and reflective road signs, but the underlying principle, automatic beam management responding to real-world light conditions detected by the car itself, is precisely the logic that governs every modern adaptive high beam system in production today. The Brougham featured automatic door locks that engaged when the transmission was placed in drive, and a mechanical interlock that prevented the transmission from being shifted into drive if any door was not fully closed. Speed-sensing door lock logic and door-open transmission interlocks, both now considered basic safety and convenience features found across virtually every vehicle segment, existed as standard equipment on this car in 1957. The all-transistor AM radio, using 13 transistors at a time when virtually every other car radio still relied on vacuum tubes, came with a motorized antenna that rose from the rear fender automatically when the radio was switched on and retracted when it was switched off. Power-assisted trunk opening and closing was another American production first on the Brougham, and the wheels themselves, forged aluminum, at a time when every other American car rode on stamped steel, were lighter, stronger, and paired with wide oval low-profile tires that were themselves appearing for the first time on a production American vehicle. Every single one of these features found its way into the broader automotive industry in the years that followed. Some took a decade, some took longer. The Brougham served as their proof of concept, a production demonstration built in limited numbers at a significant loss that these technologies worked and that buyers would want them once they experienced them. The interior of the Eldorado Brougham was not designed with restraint in mind, and understanding it requires accepting the logic of 1957 rather than applying contemporary sensibilities about appropriate levels of automotive luxury. The glove box held 6 silver-plated magnetic tumblers, engineered to remain stable when the car cornered. Because the Brougham was a car in which passengers drank, and a tumbler sliding across a moving surface was considered an inconvenience worth solving through precision engineering. The rear center armrest contained a perfume atomizer, filled at the factory with arpege, a beveled mirror, a gold mechanical pencil, a leather-covered notepad color matched to the interior upholstery, and a compact. An Evans leather cigarette case was included as standard equipment. Not an option, not an accessory available at additional cost. A standard item in a car that considered no detail too small to resolve completely. 44 full leather interior combinations were available at the factory. And if leather was insufficient for the floor, the buyer could specify mouton, caracal, or lambskin, 3 distinct grades of premium animal fur for the carpeting. The stainless steel roof was never painted and could never be, its surface requiring a manufacturing precision that paint would only obscure. The battery had been relocated to the trunk because the volume of electronic relays, motors, amplifiers, and control systems required by the Brougham's feature set had consumed every available space in the engine bay, and there was simply nowhere else to put it. The car's electrical complexity had outgrown the conventional architecture of a 1957 automobile, and the solution was to move the battery rather than reduce the complexity. This was excess pursued with total commitment, which was entirely appropriate for a car positioned as it was, and effective in communicating what the car was to anyone who encountered it, whether they were the owner, a passenger, or simply someone who opened a door. The 1957 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham is most accurately understood as a car that was simultaneously further ahead of its time than almost any other production automobile in American history, and subject to a genuine failure of execution in its most ambitious single feature. And both of those things are true simultaneously, without either one canceling the other out. The features that worked, the memory seats, the transistor radio, the forged aluminum wheels, the automatic door locks, the power trunk, the automatic headlamp dimmer, were all correct, all functional, and all filtered into the broader industry over the years that followed, confirming through adoption that the Brougham had identified what buyers would eventually want and demonstrated it at a moment when nobody else was ready to offer it. The air suspension was correct in principle, premature in materials, and honest enough about its own limitations that Cadillac released a factory conversion kit when the gap between ambition and execution became impossible to manage quietly. A decision that reflects more credit on the company than a quiet discontinuation might have done. 704 cars total across both model years. A stainless steel roof that was never painted and could never be. An engine that was listened to by hand before it left the factory. A price set above Rolls-Royce on purpose, at a loss of $10,000 per car, to prove a point that the industry spent the following 2 decades slowly confirming was correct. The car that was meant to float occasionally ended up grounded by its own suspension, sometimes literally on the side of the road between the factory and the new owner's driveway. That is an honest fact, and it belongs in any honest account of what the Brougham was. It does not diminish the car. It makes it more representative of the specific moment it came from. A moment when American engineering ambition was operating at a scale and a speed that occasionally outran the materials and manufacturing tolerances available to support it. And when the most interesting response to that gap was not caution, but the decision to build anyway and let the technology catch up. In the case of the 1957 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham, it did catch up. Across every single feature the car introduced in the 60 years that followed. If this is the kind of story you come here for, the cars that didn't just get built, but got built to prove something, subscribe to Iron Relics, and let us know in the comments which forgotten American car do you think belongs in this conversation next.